The day I found out it was a bright Saturday morning when everything changed for me. The kind of day that seemed normal at first, but would become a day I would never forget. I was just a teenager back then, still figuring out life and the world. Around me, little did I know, that day would reveal a secret I could never undo. A secret that would haunt me for the rest of my life. The house was quiet. My parents in the kitchen preparing breakfast as usual. I had just woken up, still in my pajamas, and walked into the living room. As I passed my father's study, I noticed the door was slightly ajar. My dad was always a private man, especially about his work, so it wasn't unusual for him to lock himself away in that room. But today, something was different. The door was open, and I could hear muffled voices coming from inside. I stopped in my tracks, curiosity getting the best of me. I couldn't make out exactly what was being said, but it sounded like my father was on the phone. I was about to turn away, figuring it wasn't any of my business, when I heard something that made me freeze in place. I'll tell her soon. I promise, but I can't right now. The voice was my father's, but it wasn't the words I had expected. They sounded strained, uncomfortable. It was as though he was speaking to someone who wasn't supposed to be a part of his world. I leaned a little closer to the door, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know why, but I needed to hear more. That's when I heard another voice. A woman's voice, soft but clear. You can't keep lying to her forever. She deserves to know the truth. I immediately stepped back, a wave of confusion rushing over me. I was used to hearing my dad talk on the phone with business partners or friends, but this conversation, this was different. I could tell from the tone that it wasn't about anything simple. It felt like a secret, something important, something that had been hidden. I wanted to walk away, pretend I hadn't heard anything, but my feet wouldn't move. I stood there, frozen, waiting for more. I'm not ready to tell her yet. You know how much I love my family. The words I heard Mex cut off in a quiet mumble. It was as if my father knew someone was listening, and he didn't want me to hear anymore. But I'd already heard enough. A cold knot formed in my stomach, and I slowly backed away from the door. My mind raced with questions. Who was he talking to? What was he keeping from me? What did he mean by tell her? I could feel my heart pounding harder as I turned around and rushed to my room. I collapsed onto my bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of it all. I had always thought my family was perfect. My father, a successful businessman. My mother, a loving, devoted wife. They were everything I could have wanted in parents. But now, something felt off, like a piece of the puzzle that didn't fit. I spent the rest of the day in a daze. My mind kept replaying that conversation over and over. I tried to pretend nothing had changed. I ate dinner with my family, laughed at my dad's jokes, and tried to act normal. But every time I looked at him, I felt this unexplainable distance growing between us that the next few days were the same. I avoided my father's study, avoiding the question that lingered in the back of my mind. Was my dad hiding something from me? And what was the truth he wasn't ready to tell me? One night, after my parents had gone to bed, I sat alone in the living room staring at the clock. I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. I had to know. I had to confront him, even if I wasn't sure I was ready for the answer. I walked down the hallway to my father's study, my heart beating loudly in my chest. I stood in front of the door for a few seconds, my hand hovering over the handle. Should I go in? Should I ask him directly what was going on? Before I could gather the courage, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around quickly to see my mother, standing there, a worried look on her face. What's wrong, honey? She asked softly. I shook my head, not sure how to explain what I had overheard. How could I tell her? What if I was wrong? What if it was all just a misunderstanding? I began, but the words caught in my throat. My mother stepped closer, placing a gentle hand on my shoulder. I could see the concern in her eyes, but there was something else there too, something I hadn't noticed before. Sweetheart, if something's bothering you, you can talk to me, she said, her voice soft but firm. For a moment, I felt like I could tell her everything. The truth I had overheard, the feelings I had been keeping inside, but I couldn't bring myself to speak the words out loud. Instead, I just nodded, a tear slipping down my cheek. My mother hugged me tightly, and in that moment I realized how much I had been keeping hidden, not just from my father, but from everyone. The secret I had learned wasn't just a burden on my father, it was a weight on all of us. And I wasn't sure how to carry it. The struggle to keep quiet. The next few days were a blur for the protagonist. They went through the motions of daily life, but every time they looked at their father, the secret they had learned weighed heavily on their mind. It was hard to look at him without wondering how much of him they really knew. Was everything they thought they understood about their family a lie? And how could they live with this new knowledge without tearing everything apart? The tension was unbearable. The protagonist spent hours in their room, pacing back and forth, trying to make sense of it all. Every thought seemed to spiral, pulling them deeper into confusion. On one hand, they wanted to confront their father, demand answers, but on the other, they didn't know if they could handle the truth. What if the truth was worse than they imagined? Their mother was acting strange too, more distant than usual. She seemed to know something was off, but she didn't ask. It was as though she could sense the strain in the air, but didn't want to confront it. That's when the protagonist realized the secret wasn't just between them and their father. It was a secret that had affected everyone in the family. The silence in their home was deafening one evening. While having dinner with their family, the protagonist couldn't shake the feeling of being trapped. The walls of their house, once a place of comfort, now felt like a prison. Every word, every gesture seemed so normal, yet it felt so forced. Was everyone pretending? The protagonist looked at their father, trying to read his face. There he was, sitting across the table, eating dinner like everything was fine. But the memory of that conversation, of the woman's voice and the words that still echoed in their mind, kept replaying. I'll tell her soon. Those words made their heart race. Did he have plans to confess, or was he still hiding the truth? They tried to focus on the conversation at the table, but it felt like a distant noise. Their mother asked how their day was, but the protagonist couldn't concentrate. Instead, they kept glancing at their father, wondering what was behind his calm expression. Dad, the protagonist said before they could stop themselves. What's going on? The words came out before they could think, and the entire table fell silent. The shock was instant. Their father put down his fork, his eyes narrowing slightly. For a brief moment, there was a flicker of something uncertainty, fear, but it was gone before the protagonist could fully process it. He cleared his throat. What do you mean? He asked, his voice steady, but there was an edge to it. It was as though he had been waiting for this moment, but wasn't ready to face it. I just I don't know. It feels like there's something you're not telling me. The protagonist looked down at their plate, avoiding their father's gaze, but their heart was racing. This wasn't how they had imagined it. Nothing was ever this simple. They wanted to scream the truth, to say everything that had been building inside them, but they held back. Their father's voice softened. You've been distant lately, and I know something's on your mind. But I assure you, whatever it is, you have nothing to worry about. The words felt empty. They were meant to reassure, but all they did was heighten the protagonist's anxiety. Something was off. The way he said that ... like he was trying to convince himself to. I just want to understand, Dad. the protagonist said, their voice trembling slightly. Why did you keep it from me? Why didn't you tell me? Asterisk, their father remained silent for a long moment, his gaze flickering to their mother. She sat still, her eyes not meeting either of theirs. The tension between the three of them hung heavy in the room. The protagonist could feel the cold silence growing as the weight of the question hung in the air. It wasn't just a question of infidelity anymore, it was a question about trust, about the family itself. Finally, their father spoke again, his tone more somber this time. There are things in life, sometimes things that happen that are hard to understand. I never wanted you to be part of that. It was my mistake, and I'm sorry that you had to find out this way. The words were like a punch to the stomach. It wasn't a confession, it was an apology, but it wasn't enough, not yet. The truth was still out there, buried between them, and the protagonist wasn't satisfied with the vague answers. They wanted the full story, the details that had been left unsaid, but before they could ask another question, their mother finally spoke, her voice barely a whisper. You don't need to know everything. Some things are better left in the past. The words hit harder than any of the earlier ones. It was a clear dismissal. Their mother didn't want them digging deeper. She wanted them to leave it alone, to pretend it hadn't happened. But how could they? How could they go back to pretending that everything was okay? The protagonists felt their chests tighten as they looked between their parents. This was the moment where they could either bury the truth and try to move on, or dig deeper into the pain that had been left hidden for so long. I don't want to pretend anymore, the protagonist whispered, their voice barely audible. I can't. Their father stood up abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. This isn't the time. We'll talk about it later, okay? But the words felt hollow. The protagonist knew deep down that there would never be a good time. The truth had been exposed, and no matter how hard they tried to ignore it, they couldn't unsee what they had already witnessed. The secret had torn through the family like a storm, and now it was impossible to go back to the way things were done. As the conversation ended awkwardly, the protagonists retreated to their room, feeling more isolated than ever. The burden of knowing the truth and yet not knowing how to handle it felt heavier than ever before. There was no going back now. Asterisk, the walls come crashing down. The days that followed were filled with a strange tension, like a storm brewing in the distance. The protagonist couldn't shake the weight of the conversation at dinner. Their father's words, so careful and measured, echoed in their mind. Some things are better left in the past. That statement had only deepened the mystery. It made them wonder if the truth was something their father couldn't face, or if it was something far worse than they had imagined. The protagonists spent most of their time locked in their room, replaying every word, every glance shared between their parents. The house felt different now. The walls seemed to close in, suffocating them with the knowledge of the secret that had been buried for so long. The question kept repeating in their mind, what had really happened? One afternoon, when the silence became too much to bear, the protagonist decided to take matters into their own hands. They couldn't live with the unknown any longer. If their father wouldn't tell them the full story, then they would find the answers themselves. They decided to go into their father's study. This had always been a place of mystery. It was where their father kept his important papers, his personal files, things that were off limits to the family. Over the years, they had learned to respect that boundary, but today, they couldn't hold back any longer. Their heart pounded as they made their way down the hallway, their steps echoing in the quiet house. The door to the study was closed, just as it had been so many times before. They hesitated for a moment, hand resting on the doorknob, unsure whether this was the right decision. But the hunger for answers overpowered the fear. With a quiet turn of the handle, the door creaked open. The study was just as it had always been, neatly organized. The wooden desk lined with papers, bookshelves filled with knowledge that only their father seemed to understand. But today, there was something different in the air. Something unsettling. The protagonist approached the desk, their eyes scanning over the familiar items, searching for something that might give them a clue. And then they saw a dot at the far end of the desk. Slightly hidden under a pile of papers was a small, worn leather folder. It stood out from everything else, too out of place, too personal. Their hearts skipped a beat. It was almost as if it was calling to them. Without thinking, they pulled the folder from the pile. Inside were several documents, letters, receipts, and, to their horror, photographs. The photographs were of their father, but there was something wrong. He was with another woman. The same woman whose voice they had overheard on the phone weeks earlier. Their father's face was different, more relaxed, more comfortable than they had ever seen him with their mother. The protagonist's stomach twisted with dread as they flipped through the pictures. The images were intimate, and the emotions captured in them, love, passion, seemed so real, so raw. This was the truth. The thing their father had kept hidden for so long, the betrayal, the secret, and there it was, laid bare before them. Protagonist's hands began to shake, and they felt dizzy. The weight of the discovery pressed down on them, suffocating them with the knowledge that their entire understanding of their family was built on lies. They didn't want to believe it. They didn't want to face it. But the truth was right there, staring them in the face. Suddenly, the door creaked open behind them, and they froze. The figure standing in the doorway was unmistakable. It was their father. "What are you doing in here?" he asked, his voice eerily calm, but the tension in his eyes gave him away. He knew exactly what they had found. The protagonist stood frozen, the folder still clutched in their hands. Their heart raced as they turned to face him, the words caught in their throat. What could they say? How could they confront him about something so painful? I didn't mean to, the protagonist stammered, but their father cut them off, stepping into the room. "You're right," he said quietly, his voice breaking slightly. "You shouldn't have seen this." There was a long silence as the protagonist's father walked over to the desk, sitting down in the chair with a heavy sigh. His face was worn, his eyes tired, but there was no denying the guilt that hung in the air. "I never wanted you to find out this way," he said, his voice filled with regret. But I guess it was only a matter of time. The protagonist stood still, unable to look away. The pictures in their hands felt like weights each, one pulling them deeper into the painful truth. Why? Was all the protagonist could ask, their voice barely above a whisper. Why did you do this? Why did you keep it from us? The father's gaze fell to the floor, as if he couldn't bring himself to meet his child's eyes. He looked old and, that moment, broken, burdened by the weight of his choices. "It wasn't about you. I made a mistake, a huge one. And I thought I could keep it hidden, protect you from it. But the truth is, I've hurt everyone around me, including you." The words hung in the air, like a heavy fog that wouldn't lift. The protagonist felt the tears welling up, but they refused to let them fall. There was too much to process, too much pain to understand. "You should have told me," the protagonist said, their voice breaking. "We should have faced it together. We could have dealt with it, together." Their father's expression softened. "I know. I thought I could carry the burden alone, that I could protect you and your mother from it. But in the end, I've only made things worse." For a long moment, the two of them just sat there in silence. The weight of the revelation hung between them, and the protagonist realized with a heavy heart that the family they had once known would never be the same. The secret was out, and it would change everything. I'm sorry, the father whispered, his voice full of regret. I never wanted to hurt you, but I did. I'll do whatever it takes to make things right. The protagonist stood there, still clutching the folder, unsure of what to say. The truth was out, but the road to healing, if it was even possible, was still unclear. The secret was no longer something they could keep hidden, but it was still something they had to carry. And now they would have to figure out how to move forward, not just with their father, but with the entire family. Asterisk, the aftermath of the truth. The silence that followed the revelation was suffocating. For what felt like an eternity, neither the protagonist nor their father spoke. The only sounds were the soft ticking of the clock on the wall and the faint hum of the ship's engines outside the study. The truth had been uncovered, but the path ahead was still clouded with uncertainty. The protagonist stood still, staring at the floor, trying to process the whirlwind of emotions that had just rushed through them. Betrayal, anger, confusion, these feelings tangled together in a way they couldn't untangle. They had always seen their father as a rock, a pillar of strength in the family. But now that pillar seemed cracked and unstable. Dad, the protagonist's voice trembled as they looked up at him. How long? Their father's face was pale, the weight of the truth visibly pressing down on him. He sat slumped in his chair, his hands folded together as if he were holding on to something inside himself. A long time. Far longer than I should have let it go on. The words felt like daggers. The protagonist's breath caught in their throat as they tried to make sense of everything. The betrayal didn't just hurt it, shattered everything they thought they knew about their father, about their family. Why did you think you could hide this from us? The protagonist's voice rose slightly, frustration boiling over. Why? Didn't you tell Mom? Didn't she deserve to know? Didn't I deserve to know? Their father flinched at the question, but it didn't stop him from answering. I was selfish. I was scared, and I thought if I kept the truth hidden, it would protect you both. He paused, his eyes turning to the floor. But I've only caused more harm by keeping the secret. I thought that by keeping you safe from the truth, I could keep our family together. But now, I see how wrong I was. The protagonist took a step forward, the emotions swirling inside them becoming unbearable. This isn't just about protecting the family. It's about trust. You broke that trust. There was no defensiveness in their father's eyes, only regret. I know. I've broken your trust, and I'm sorry. I never wanted to hurt you, but I did. I can't undo it, but I'll do whatever it takes to rebuild what I can. I don't know if I can forgive you, the protagonist said, their voice a whisper now. The weight of the words hung in the air. Could they forgive him? Could they ever look at their father the same way again? Their father's face softened with pain. I understand. I don't expect forgiveness right away. This is something that will take time. But I'm asking for the chance to make it right, to rebuild what I've broken. The protagonist sat down slowly, the folder with the photos still in their hand, though they had forgotten about it in the rush of emotions. Their mind raced. Could they really ever forgive their father? Was it possible to rebuild trust after something so deep, so painful? Mom must know, the protagonist said, their voice quieter this time. She must know the truth. You can't keep hiding this from her. It's not fair to her. Their father nodded slowly. I will tell her. It's time. I've been putting it off for too long, but now we have to face everything together. The protagonist remained silent, feeling the weight of everything that had been left unsaid. The situation was far from over. It was only just beginning. What would happen when their mother found out? How would their family survive this revelation? Could they survive? How do we even start fixing this? The protagonist asked, the question echoing in the quiet room. They weren't asking for answers. They were just trying to find a way through the mess that had become their family. How could they even begin to heal? Their father sighed deeply, as though the weight of the world had been placed on his shoulders. I don't know, but we'll start by being honest. From here on out, no more lies, no more hiding. We'll face it all, no matter how hard it is. Together, we'll take it one step at a time. That's the only way forward now. Asterisk, asterisk. The protagonists closed their eyes for a moment, their mind processing everything. The burden of the secret had been lifted, but now there were new struggles to face. Trust had been broken, and it wouldn't be easily mended. Yet, somewhere deep inside, a small part of them still clung to the hope that maybe, just maybe, this family could survive, could rebuild itself from the ashes of the past, but it wouldn't be easy. There would be questions, there would be pain, and there would be moments of doubt. But one thing was clear. The road ahead would require honesty, patience, and most of all, time. Asterisk, the family confrontation days passed, and the weight of the truth hung in the air like a thick fog. The silence that had followed the confession remained, not out of avoidance, but out of necessity. Each family member was grappling with the new reality in their own way. The protagonist, unable to shake the turmoil inside, found it harder to face their father, but they knew they had to. The walls between them had been broken, and now it was time to face what lay beneath. The evening arrived, and it felt as though the house itself had braced for the coming storm. The protagonist had avoided their mother for the last few days, unable to bring themselves to speak the truth to her. How could they? What would she say? How could anyone even begin to process such a betrayal? But tonight, everything had to change. Their father had made a promise, and the time had come to keep it. Sitting at the dinner table, the protagonist could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating. Their mother had been unusually quiet, her eyes distant as she picked at her food. She had already sensed something was off, but no one had said anything. Not yet. The father, however, sat uncomfortably, his hands resting on the table, his face drawn with guilt. He kept glancing at the protagonist, but when his eyes landed on their mother, his gaze faltered. The silence was deafening, and the time had come. "Mom, there's something we need to tell you," the protagonist finally said, their voice breaking the quiet tension. It wasn't easy to speak those words, but they knew there was no turning back now. Their mother's head snapped up, her eyes narrowing in confusion. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice laced with concern. She had been waiting for this moment, but she had no idea how it would unfold. "It's about Dad," the protagonist began, unable to meet their father's gaze. "There's something you need to know. It's about what's been going on." Their father's face paled, and he let out a deep sigh, closing his eyes for a moment. His expression was a mixture of regret and acceptance. He knew this moment would come, but he wasn't ready for it. No one ever was. "It's true," the father finally said, his voice hoarse. "I've been unfaithful. And I kept it from you, kept it from both of you, because I didn't know how to face it." The words hit like a slap. The mother's face went ashen, her fork clattering to the plate. The shock and disbelief in her eyes were clear. She had suspected something was wrong, but had never imagined the truth would be so painful. "What do you mean?" she whispered, barely able to speak. "How could you do this to me? To us?" The father looked at her, his eyes filled with sorrow. "I never meant for it to happen, but it did. And I've been carrying this guilt, this shame for so long. I thought if I kept it hidden, it would protect you, protect the family. But it was a lie, and now it's out. I'm sorry, truly." The mother stood up suddenly, her chair scraping harshly against the floor. Her hands trembled, and she turned away, walking to the window. The silence between them was thick, as if the very air had become dense with grief and betrayal. The protagonist sat quietly, watching the scene unfold, feeling like an outsider in their own home. Their heart ached, but they knew they had to let their parents face this together. The truth had been forced into the open, and now it was time for everyone to deal with the consequences. I don't know what to say. Their mother finally spoke, her voice cracked. I can't just forget this. How long has this been going on, John? How long have you lied to me? The father's face twisted in pain. For years, Mary, for years. I never meant for it to hurt you, but it did, and I'm sorry. I failed. You. Tears streamed down the mother's face as she turned back to face him. I don't know if I can forgive you. The words were sharp, raw, and full of the pain that had been festering for so long. The father hung his head, the weight of his actions too much to bear. The protagonist could feel the heaviness in the room, the emotional earthquake that had just shattered their family's foundation. I don't know if I can forgive myself either, their father whispered, the regret and guilt apparent in his voice. The protagonist looked between their parents, unsure of how to fix this. There was no easy solution, no magic words to take away the hurt. They had all been betrayed, and the damage was done. But there was something in the air, something small and fragile. It was the beginning of healing, of reckoning with the past. Mother wiped her tears, and for the first time since the conversation had started, she met her husband's eyes. The pain in her gaze was unmistakable, but so was the faint glimmer of understanding. She hadn't forgiven him, not yet, but she wasn't walking away. Not yet. We'll talk about this more, she said, her voice quieter now. But I need time, John. I need time to process all of this. The father nodded, tears in his eyes. I understand. I'll give you all the time you need. The room fell silent once more, but the weight of the secret had finally been lifted. It wasn't the happy reunion that many hoped for, but it was a start. The family had faced the truth, and now they had to decide what to do with it.